Paul Finebaum here. In the South, we love football and Crystal. The hot off the grill Crystal burger is the perfect complement to any tailgate. Take a steamer pack of 24 Crystals to your tailgate. Why didn't I think of that? Plus, Crystal knows you love wings. Barbecue or buffalo wings, Crystal is the stop for all of your cravings this fall. Text Paul, that is Paul, to 37793, and Crystal will hook you up with 2 free Crystals. Nobody does football like the South, and nobody does tailgates like Crystal.
Bring your own guts.
This is the best.
Do you hear me?
Of the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
Dan Murphy here from ESPN to talk about the big news today that Shea Patterson is transferring. Dan, thanks. Appreciate the time. Let's talk about, first of all, what's going on here. He certainly has to get a waiver. What can you tell us in terms of that procedure? Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Paul. Thanks for having me. That's not a sure thing yet. Because he would have eligibility left once Ole Miss's bowl ban expires, he doesn't get automatically waived to transfer wherever he wants. He'll have to petition the NCAA. I would imagine, given that he's leaving and that Michigan is taking him, that they feel pretty good about their chances there. I think the argument they would make is that Ole Miss withheld some information from them about exactly what those sanctions would look like, and say because of that they want a free pass to start over. It seems like common sense would point to, in the fact that he's making this move, that they feel pretty good about their chances of that happening.
So let's assume that he gets the green light. Tell us in covering that league what type of significance this would have for Jim Harbaugh and his team. Well, I mean,
if he gets that go, he immediately jumps to the top of the list or among the top of the list, at least the most talented quarterbacks in the Big Ten. He's probably up there with Trace McSorley and maybe Dwayne Haskins, who's the heir apparent at Ohio State once J.T. Barrett finishes up. And really, I mean, it's been a missing piece for Michigan, especially this past year during their 8-4 season. The quarterback wasn't the only issue that the Wolverines had, but as you know, a good quarterback can make a lot of other issues disappear, and Michigan did not have the guy that could make other issues disappear this season.
And you also know Jim Harbaugh's offensive philosophy, assuming there has been one for the last couple of years. Put Shea Patterson in there. What happens to it, and how does it change?
I think he's a great fit. He's a big, strong-armed guy with pro-style type tendencies. I don't think Harbaugh is going to change too much of what he does, depending on who's under center. But I think Patterson's a good fit there. I think he'll come in and have to compete with Brandon Peters, who's another 6'5" guy with a pretty strong arm, to win that starting job. I mean, Patterson obviously has a pretty good shot of it, but I would imagine he wasn't given any guarantees in coming up to Ann Arbor. I think the philosophy that Harbaugh has most above anything else is the more competition you can squeeze into one place, the better off it's going to be, no matter how things shake out. He's betting big that'll be the case with Patterson, I think.
Talking to Dan Murphy about this decision, what else do you think Jim Harbaugh is capable of in relation to Ole Miss? Because there's been some speculation that Shea Patterson was not the only player he was eyeing.
Yeah, Ole Michigan it might be by the time this offseason's over. It sounds like there's a couple other guys that Patterson might bring up there with him. I saw somebody made a comment in the past week that it would be an interesting last bit of revenge for Harbaugh, because one of his most outspoken critics in that the satellite camp debates over the past couple of years was down at Ole Miss there. And now he's heading down there with what might be a short bus full of players by the time he's all said and done. But I think Patterson coming up there is a good sign that at least one or two guys might want to follow him to Ann Arbor, and I'm sure they'd be welcomed on Michigan's roster at this point.
Interesting stuff. Shea Patterson announcing today. Do you have any backstory on how this came about? I mean, obviously we knew this was coming down the pike, And also, the second part of that is in terms of being contingent on the appeal, I would think. But, I mean, how did Jim Harbaugh connect, if you know, with Shea Patterson?
You know, I don't know all of the details there. I know that Patterson played at IMG along with a couple other guys who are at Michigan now. Cesar Ruiz is Michigan's center of the future, and one of their top recruits from a year ago. I know he and Patterson are pretty close. Patterson has moved around quite a bit and played a bunch of different places in high school. He was at Toledo, Ohio, where he was born, which is also where Harbaugh was born. So that's about an hour away from Michigan's campus, right on the Michigan-Ohio border. So he's not a total stranger to this part of the country, which probably helps a little bit too.
Dan, many thanks for your help. Fascinating story. I know it's certainly a game changer in the Big Ten. Great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
You too. Thanks, Paul.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
Let's move along and check in with Jeff, who is in Memphis, Tennessee. Hello, Jeff.
Hey, Paul. How you doing today, man?
Doing great. Operator, get me Memphis, Tennessee.
I was the guy that called in the other day about Pruitt getting the job at Alabama. I think I mentioned something to you. Remember the call the other day?
I sure do. You bet.
I just want to say, Paul, appreciate what you guys do, and appreciate all all the things you bring us. Hey, I didn't get in the other day when Jim had his breakdown or whatever, but here's the thing that I have come to talking about Jim and Squirrel. What do you think as far as Paul, as far as just banning Jim from the show? What do you think?
Do you think we should ban? In the history of this show, I think as it stands, there's only one ban still in existence. And I'm not going to get into that because I'm not going to glorify the guy that did it. We have banned two other people. They both had trials, and I was the judge at both proceedings, and I found them guilty but committed them to time served, so we let both Phyllis and Tammy come back. So the question on the table is, should Jim be banned? Mark and John, you guys have an opinion on that?
Yeah. Did I miss something? What would he be banned for?
I'm not sure what the transgression was.
There's been nothing so egregious I've seen that would require a ban.
Is this an ethics complaint?
Well, kind of, it just seems to me like he's hung in the old show, and, I think, Paul, what you guys are doing is great.
Well, but Jeff, you can't ban someone because 11 years ago he made a phone call to a talk show, which was this show, and said, right after we changed radio stations, 11 years ago, and because he said, this is the worst show I've ever heard, and it will never be successful. And, I mean, you can't ban him for saying the same thing like 10 times.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, if he doesn't like the show, why don't he just quit listening? I mean,
I agree. And by the way, we really like the show. I mean,
I love it. I think what you're doing is fabulous, Paul.
I mean, we come here every day, and everybody, all the people that work behind the scenes, put a lot of time in the show, and it's disappointing that the only person that doesn't like it is Jim. I think we should just shut the show down because one person doesn't like it.
I mean, what do the listeners think? I mean, can they call in and vote?
I mean, it's we only have about 10 listeners left, so based on Jim, and we don't have any. Do we have any viewers? Do you know?
Yeah,
I don't think so. I mean, you can't. You walk into you live where? You walk into a sports bar in Memphis or Birmingham, and probably honestly, today you might not see us. There's a pretty good chance the cable news networks are going to be on at every sports bar in Alabama today, but that will change tomorrow. But yeah, really good call there, Jim. I don't know. I mean, sometimes you just have to roll with the punches, and we've had a lot of listeners and callers that have been with us the whole time, and this next guy, I never remember him calling. He can complain and critique, and that's fair. That's what we do here. But I've never heard this guy say this show's the worst I've ever listened to. Right, I-Man?
Absolutely not. No, and not live from the capital of the cradle city.
Yeah, we know.
Capital city. Anyway, why would you ban Jim? I mean, although he did say he could outswim Johnny Weissmuller.
Yeah. Well, no, I think to ban some. And
he was a better dog than Deputy Dog, and he was a better hitter than Ted Williams, and he's probably a better catcher than Johnny Bench too, and probably a better pitcher than Sandy Koufax, and all those things. And he played pool better than Minnesota Fats.
He did.
But why would you ban him? Jim is a great caller. I love a good lie in the middle of the afternoon. And he tells one better than anybody, Paul. He tells those lies with a straight face, and you could almost believe them if they weren't unbelievable. But I do know this, and bear with me for a second.
Okay, I will.
The state of Alabama football teams have laid it all on the line. This state of Alabama, its football fans have laid it all on the line. Tomorrow is the day the Alabama voters should lay it all on the line and vote for a man that does his job and doesn't whine and complain and point fingers and get kicked out of his job. Tomorrow, the hell freezes over, Paul Finebaum. The Eagles are back on tour, and I will be voting Democrat for the first time in 31 years.
Are you okay? I mean, I don't normally talk about politics. But when a man calls up and says he's voting Democratic for the first time in 31 years?
31 years.
For those who don't know, and I can't imagine how you wouldn't, there's an election tomorrow in Alabama. I'll say no more. But it's the most... no more. I didn't mean that intentionally. I don't take sides in political races. But I mean that's pretty extraordinary. Okay, we know who you're voting for tomorrow. Who was the last Democrat you voted for?
Charlie Graddick.
Charlie Graddick. I don't even remember Charlie being a Democrat, but I know he was.
Well, he was in the race with Bill Baxley.
He
the
was
Democratic Party pulled him
listen,
out.
I do know. I mean, he's a Republican now, as a lot of people in Alabama became. But he was in a runoff with Bill Baxley, and the Democratic. And the Democratic bosses stole the election.
Well, and you know what? The Republican
a couple of good friends of mine, by the way, stole it. But they did steal that. Would you not agree, man?
What's that now?
They did steal it away from Charlie.
Oh, absolutely they did. The people voted him in, and the Republican Party was just there as an honorary party. It really had no weight in the state of Alabama.
Guy Hunt was the nominee. Election. You're right.
And I'm telling you, for the first time, and I haven't block voted. I voted for people that I did my research on. I didn't vote for every Republican, but I will vote for Doug Jones tomorrow. And it's because I've heard him on this program, on your other shows years ago. He's a man that did his job, and I tell you what, he's a man that put his life on the line for some of the trials that he did prosecute. And I respect that versus a man who's been run out of his job twice. And this has nothing to do with allegations. It has everything to do with taxpayer money in the state of Alabama. And I am voting for the state of Alabama tomorrow. And if Mr. Jones later has to do something nationally because of his party recognition, that's on him. But I am voting for the people of the state of Alabama tomorrow. War Damn Eagle, we're only getting faster. Vote Doug Jones and vote as often as you can. Have a good day.
Well, no, I don't think you can vote more than 4 times, can you? What's that old line about Louisiana that I love so much? Was it Edwin Edwards? Is Governor Edwards still alive? I saw him a couple of years ago. What a character.
He's still alive.
He is alive. He was governor of Louisiana a number of times. And he had this line, he said, it's election day, vote early and vote often.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
Hey girl, have you done something new with your scales? Using new moisturizer? Nice. It really brings out the hazel in your eyes. Oh, hold on. Are you using whitening strips too? Your fangs look good, girl. Really good.
A really charming snake charmer? Surprising. What's not surprising? How much you could save by switching to Geico.
Wait, what? Have you been doing Pilates too?
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more.
It was BYOG, bring your own guts.
This is the best
Do you hear me?
of the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
This was November 7th. We don't have to go back 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. This was November 7th, 2017. By my calculation, that was 1 month and 4 days ago. Mike Bianchi writing in the Orlando Sentinel, Jimbo Fisher is not going to Texas A&M. Okay, let's see if we think Jimbo went, didn't we? I watched the press conference. Mike, welcome to the show. Good afternoon. Happy holidays.
Yeah, Paul. Yeah, I was waiting for this call. I've been waiting for this for a couple, at least for 10 days now since Jimbo, bailed on Florida State. I apologize for thinking Jimbo would have more pride than to quit after such a horrible season.
Ooh, that hurt.
Yeah.
So I'm more interested. I mean, we all know he left. I'm more interested in your thought process then and even 2 years ago when he danced with LSU, why you did not think Jimbo would leave Florida State.
Because the people I talked to at Florida State thought that this was just another Jimbo sort of power grab at Florida State. He dances every year. He always comes up with something to try to get more from Florida State, and I think that that's what they thought this was. And obviously when Texas A&M made Jimbo the biggest offer in college football history, I guess Florida State said, "Hey, we're not going to match that after the season you just coached," and I don't blame him. I mean, Jimbo Fisher has gotten everything that he's asked for at Florida State for years. I mean, yes, Texas A&M has great facilities. There's no question about that. But Florida State was building Jimbo every facility he wanted. They gave him every bit of staffing that he wanted. They paid his assistant coaches what he wanted, and Florida State gave and gave and gave. And after a 5-6 season, they weren't about to match Texas A&M, nor should they have.
I am interested, Mike. Listen, we all believe certain things, and I know you, and I say this out of many years of friendship. You wouldn't have said that or reported that if you didn't believe it. I mean, you've got a long reputation, but in terms of the breaking point, what do you think it was? What do you think pushed Jimbo Fisher to take this job where he's turned down a lot of jobs in the past?
Well, I think the LSU job was a better job than Texas A&M, and I know Texas A&M people don't like to hear that, but I think LSU was a better job. I don't know that they were offering Jimbo Fisher the contract that Texas A&M gave him, but LSU, in my opinion, was a better job. If he was going to take a job, I would have thought that would have been the job. But again, Texas A&M is a perennially underachieving program, and I think Jimbo Fisher sees the opportunity there to sort of start anew, to build his own legacy. Let's face it, at Florida State, Bobby Bowden's always going to be the father of Florida State football, the creator of Florida State football, even though Jimbo Fisher upgraded the program and rebuilt it after Bobby let it go, let it slide for all those years. So I think that's probably, the obviously it was a cash grab, and when he got the cash and he had a chance to sort of start anew, and I do think he bailed on Florida State.
Well, I don't think. Mike, come on. Do you blame him for taking the money?
Do I blame him for taking the money?
You've used the phrase "bailed" a couple of times, like he snuck out of town.
Well, Paul, if he were 12-1 in the college football playoff right now, I don't think he's the next coach at Texas A&M. I think he saw his program was cracking a little bit. He was 5-6. He was getting some heat about his assistant coaches, and the administration wanted him to fire some assistant coaches. So yeah, I think he bailed, because if he had a good season this year, I don't think he takes the job. No. So in my opinion, that's bailing.
Okay, well we'll agree that those are your words. Do you think
he would have gone if he were 12-1 in the college football playoff?
Well, of course, nobody would have gone under those circumstances.
Okay. Then you're getting out while the getting's good. That defines bailing out.
Again, I realize you've had the same job for a long time, and that's commendable. Very few people stay put.
I will say this, though. If the SEC network offered me Paul Finebaum money, I would bail right now.
I would encourage you to as well. Just kidding. I feel like I know you, and I'm hearing some things in your voice. Do you think this was a good decision for him, forgetting the money? And I know you can't just say forget $75 million, but if he's not successful, then it's not a good decision.
Yeah, obviously it's more money. It's a chance to start anew, but call me a Florida homer, a provincial Sunshine State homer if you want, but I think Florida State, taking the money out of it, I think Florida State is a better job. I think he had a chance and has a chance to be more successful at Florida State. I think he's banging his head against the wall in the SEC West. Maybe he wants that challenge. I don't know, but I just think Florida State is a better job than Texas A&M. Florida State has won multiple national championships. They've won multiple conference championships. I don't know when the last time Texas A&M won a conference title. I believe it was when they were in the Big 12 under R.C. Slocum. And, you know, their last national title was, 77 years ago? And, again, maybe Jimbo Fisher wants to be the guy that brings them to glory, but good luck getting through Alabama, LSU, and that SEC West.
You do think, do you not, a lot of his ability as a head coach?
Oh, yeah, I think Jimbo Fisher's a terrific head coach. He's a terrific recruiter. Obviously, he was, you know, other than Nick Saban and maybe Urban Meyer, he was probably the top recruiter in college football over the last 5 or 6 years. So, yeah, he's a terrific recruiter. He knows how to build a program and organize a program. I've always compared Jimbo Fisher to an NFL coach, even though he has that West Virginia accent and sort of that country boy image. Jimbo Fisher runs a sophisticated, state-of-the-art college football program. I think he's going to be a terrific coach at Texas A&M, and I think he'd be a terrific NFL coach as well.
Talking to Mike Bianchi, let me get your thoughts. We haven't had a chance to talk to you since Dan Mullen landed at Florida. Your thoughts on that, and how do you think he will do in Gainesville?
I think Dan Mullen is a really good hire for Florida simply because he knows what to expect at Florida. Jim McElwain was not the right fit. We all know that now in hindsight. Dan Mullen knows the pressure at Florida. He's been in it. He knows how to develop quarterbacks, which is something McElwain couldn't do, Will Muschamp couldn't do. The last quarterback the Gators developed was Tim Tebow, and that was Dan Mullen doing the developing. So I think it's a really good hire for Florida, especially in a time we're seeing at Tennessee and some of these other schools that it's hard to hire a really good coach, and I think Florida grabbed Dan Mullen while they could.
Yeah, you mentioned Tennessee. Of course, Florida and Tennessee are huge rivals. Jeremy Pruitt to Tennessee, do you think they settled for him, or do you think he is a good enough coach to turn that program around?
I don't know if he's going to be the next Kirby Smart or not. Very few of Nick Saban's disciples have really, when you look at it, Jimbo Fisher was a Nick Saban disciple. He made it. It looks like Kirby Smart is going to make it at Georgia, although let's see what he does for the long haul. But some of the others, Will Muschamp, Derek Dooley, Jim McElwain, those are all Nick Saban disciples too, and they didn't make it. So, again, I don't know if I think they settled for Jeremy Pruitt because it was getting the coaching search was starting to take a long time, and I do think schools like Tennessee, all schools, in my opinion, schools like Tennessee, Florida, I think a lot of the fan base have way too high opinion of their job and think they can just lure in, like John Gruden's going to come. Florida thought they were getting Chip Kelly. That didn't happen. So, I think these schools sometimes have to settle for the best. I think Florida settled on Jim McElwain 3 years ago.
Before you go, you cover the SEC, you cover a lot of college football, but you also spend a lot of time in the ACC. Frame the semifinal game between Alabama and Clemson for us.
It's funny that Alabama goes in. To me, it's funny anyways. Probably not to you. Well, to you guys too, because Alabama's the king of college football. Nick Saban is the king of college football, and now Alabama goes in as sort of are they the Cinderella story in these playoffs now? They seem like the heavy underdog in this game, and that, to me, that's dangerous. If Alabama, with all of that talent they've recruited over the years, for them to be considered an underdog. But, when you look at what Clemson's done over the last 3 or 4 years, Alabama probably should be the underdog, but obviously you're not going to count Nick Saban out of this game.
Mike Bianchi, thoughts on a number of topics, including Jimbo Fisher bailing on Florida State. Mike, always a pleasure. Thank you for your time.
See you, Paul.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
Florida State didn't say, well, hold on a second, Jimbo. Maybe we could sit down. Maybe we could have a conversation. Maybe we could accommodate. They basically said, we're not dealing with you. If you want to take it, go ahead. So that's usually, I've been there before. People say, don't think we're going to offer you that kind of money. Well, good. I'll just go where they are, where I feel wanted. Right, Bobby? You've been there before, right?
How you doing today, buddy?
I am doing great, Bobby.
Boy, you fall in love with your coach, boy. I can see it next season. Jimbo Fisher.
Bobby, you just don't like me liking anyone but your guy.
Hey, last year was Dan Mullen.
Hey, look what happened to Dan Mullen.
And then, hey, you know who it was the year before that, don't you?
Who's that?
Oh, what a great coach Hugh Freeze is.
Well, I did. I did say Hugh Freeze was a great coach, and you know something? He was a great coach.
He was, but I try to tell you,
I can't deal with. I don't know what he's doing when he's not coaching.
Yeah, hey, you know why your boy left? He left for the money. You know that, don't you?
Who's that? Jimbo?
Which one? Yeah. Hey, left for the money.
Hey, Bobby, do I look? I mean, listen, don't answer this question. Do I look stupid?
No.
Of course, I know why he left.
If you were stupid, Paul, I wouldn't be calm.
I mean, yeah, I know why. I know why he left. And you heard me say countless times I believe Dan Mullen was going to leave because Dan Mullen looked around, and as much as he loved Mississippi State, and if there's a lot to love there, he knew there was a lot of money elsewhere.
Everybody love American money. You can do something with American money that you can't do with no other kind of money. You can take American money and spend it anywhere in the world.
You're right. You can invest it in China or...
But you ain't even got to change it to yen.
Well, yeah, exactly.
You pull it out. The first thing they say, oh, American money.
American money.
American money.
We like that. We like American money.
Don't you? But I'm going to tell you what your boy got to do when he go to Texas A&M. He got to recruit a defense outside the state of Texas. He can't have nobody on his defense from Texas. Because they do not play defense in Texas. You know that?
You know, Bobby, one of these days you're going to be talking about some other coach, and that other coach is going to be on top.
Yeah. Well, I ain't got long left no way, Paul, so it won't be in my lifetime.
Might be Kirby Smart this year.
Kirby's a good coach. I pull for Kirby.
I know you do.
Right.
How are you going to feel if Kirby plays Nick for the championship?
Well, you know what happened.
You're going to say, we'll let the best man win?
No, he's an understudy. You know what happened to understudy.
Understudies, 11 times the understudy has lost to the master.
Yeah. But I'm going to tell you something, Paul, as far as the defensive players, like they say, you can take bricks and build an in-house, but you can't take it and build a what? A brick house.
A brick house, yeah. Hey, by the way, Brick House was a great song by the Commodores.
Yeah, I knew a couple of them boys.
Did you?
Yeah.
That's funny. I got to introduce them at a concert a couple of years, a charity concert. They are one interesting group of people.
Well, my wife's great grandfather founded Tuskegee Institute.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Well, his name was Lewis Adams. They say Booker T. Washington founded, but he was the first principal.
Okay.
They said and got it. I got all the information in it.
No, I spent about 20 or 30 minutes with the Commodores a couple of years ago in Birmingham. There was remember the charity concert for the tornado, and I was asked to introduce them. They came out and sang Brick House, and man, was that exciting.
Well,
boom.
I used to see them at a place called the Patterson Inlet for $2.
Oh my goodness! I imagine you saw some big names back in the day.
Oh yeah, the Temptations.
Oh.
Yeah,
that's my imagination.
Yeah. But look, Paul, I ain't going to hold you. I'm going to say this, Paul, and I'm going to let you go. Ain't no show like this show, near this show. This must be the show.
This is the show. Hey, thanks, Bobby. Man, Bobby knew the Commodores back in the day when Lionel was in the Commodores. They've done okay without Lionel. And Lionel's done okay without them. Exactly. Let's see. We're still on the air. Let's keep going. Jake is up next. Not that I'm looking at the clock. But it is 5 o'clock. Somewhere. Jake, go right ahead.
Hello, Paul. This is Jake from Oxford.
Oh, great to hear from you.
I was wondering, what do you think Georgia's chances are of beating Alabama? Do you think that our front seven can put pressure on Hurts?
No, Jake, hold on a second. Jake.
Yes, sir.
You're asking me and honestly asking me about Alabama meeting Georgia? I mean, you can't wait to get through the Clemson game. You got to look ahead to Georgia.
Oh, Clemson's been spotty all year long.
Okay, I don't want to sound like your dad here or something, but I mean, take one game at a time.
No, I mean Clemson. They haven't been consistent enough. I mean they've struggled with good defenses.
And Jake, and Alabama has. Did you see Alabama down the stretch?
I mean they were hurt. You're down. You lose
they were hurt.
Linemen. Any offense is going to look good. I mean, I just don't think that Clemson has the offense to beat.
I mean, so an Alabama fan is already looking ahead to Georgia.
No. I'm a Georgia fan.
Or Georgia fans already looking ahead.
I've looked at every game all year.
That's even worse.
But I mean, you can.
You're looking right past you're looking right past Oklahoma and Baker Mayfield.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, look at the Iowa State game. I mean, they have a mediocrity defense, and it's just
pretty mediocre.
I don't see him. Mediocre, yeah, but it's mediocrity. It's not even mediocre.
No, you're right. By the way, you were right the first time. There is a lot of mediocrity there on defense.
I mean, I just think that Baker Mayfield, if you make him have to put passes in certain spots, he's not going to be able to do it. I mean, look at all the games he's won this year. None of them have been like 17-10 or 24
well, I mean, the game against Oklahoma State was a shootout. Now, again, it was like 62-54, but he did have to bring them back.
If you look at it, I mean, defensively, he can't score against defenses, and I mean that's one thing that Kirby Smart prides himself on is a good defense, and I just think Clemson's not going to be able to do it. I mean, look at Bama in any other situation; they'll lose once, but they're not going to lose twice. And I think Kirby's kind of instilling that in Georgia, what he has this year. And I think it's going to be Georgia and Alabama all the way, without a doubt.
Jake, I hope it is. I'm not admonishing you for looking ahead, but I got enough on the smorgasbord for the first round of games.
But I'm saying, so if you paired them up, who do you think would win? I mean, I'm just asking.
I can't answer that question until I see the semifinal games. Because I really would like to see what Alabama's all about, whether they get, it's one thing getting players back. It's another thing having those players look healthy and executing.
Yes, sir.
So I think you can sense where my doubts might be.
Yes, sir. I understand.
But we will. I'm hoping 3 weeks from tomorrow. Actually, 3 weeks from tomorrow, the championship game will be over. 2 weeks from tomorrow. We're having this conversation. How about that?
Yes, sir. I will call you back.
Okay.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
It was BYOG, bring your own guts.
This is the best.
Do you hear me?
Of the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
Barrett Slee joining us as we continue. Barrett, good afternoon. I hope all is well.
I'm great, Paul. How are you?
I know the weather where you live wasn't pleasant over the weekend. I hope you were safe.
I was safe, and I'm exhausted for having two kids playing in the snow all weekend. But a little better shape now after that experience.
Well, good. We were just talking about you a minute ago. I'd forgotten. I know. I follow you on Twitter, and you're always being castigated for getting things wrong. But man, did you ever get it right when it comes to the SEC?
Yeah, I was. Before the season, we do game-by-game predictions. I actually do my helmet schedule game-by-game predictions in Hoover at SEC Media Days, and for the three teams that were in the mix, Alabama, Auburn, and Georgia, I picked every single one of their SEC games right this summer, and had it playing out exactly as it played out. With Georgia beating Auburn in a revenge game in the SEC championship game, with all three basically fighting for playoff spots, and it turns out two of them got in.
That is some pretty good predicting there. And the thing I love about that, it's not after the fact. A lot, we were making fun of somebody the other. Everyone always chimes in after the games with the predictions, but you put it out there for everyone to see.
And then I pin it to my top of my profile, and then people come back and look at it and think it's brand new, which it's not. So, no, I did not have USC in the playoff going into championship weekend because I did have them winning the national championship.
Well, I had Tennessee winning the SEC championship. So,
maybe if Greg Schiano was there.
Yeah, that's when I heard he was going. Let's get some thoughts on these coaching hires. We had Bianchi on earlier talking about Jimbo Fisher. He bailed. For $75 million, that's not exactly bailing. How much of a game changer, Barrett, is this hire?
I don't think it's a game changer. I think it's interesting. I think it's definitely a different dynamic to Texas A&M. My opinion of Jimbo Fisher has changed the last year and a half or so. I used to think he would have been a slam dunk home run hire when LSU was flirting with him. But watching Florida State the last few years, his stubbornness sometimes is overbearing. He overcomplicates his offense. And going to Texas, where you've got a bunch of spread kids, you better simplify your offense. And I don't know if Jimbo's willing to do that. And to have that division now with Nick Saban with what he's doing, LSU, I think, slowly building. Auburn obviously has a head coach now that figured it out. Is Jimbo gonna make it worth their while to pay him $75 million? Because if they're paying him that much money, that means multiple SEC and national championships. And my opinion of Jimbo now is that instead of being a great coach, he's just a really good coach that had a couple of great seasons.
Wow, that's not exactly a ringing endorsement for $7.5 million a year.
Well, he's still a very good coach, but to make him, basically the SEC's version of Jim Harbaugh, he better coach better than Jim Harbaugh because Texas A&M now expects that, and Kevin Sumlin brought them to a level where, to his credit, the consistency was there. It wasn't where it needed to be. Jimbo needs to win multiple SEC and perhaps national championships, and that's way easier said than done, especially in that neighborhood.
What about Jeremy Pruitt to Tennessee? What do you make out of that?
I like the idea. I like the staff that he's reportedly, sort of assembling there. I want Tennessee fans to be patient with him because he's not Kirby Smart. He doesn't have the pedigree of Kirby Smart, the time under Nick Saban in terms of the specific responsibilities that Kirby Smart had under Nick Saban. And, Kirby Smart inherited the keys to a Ferrari. Jeremy Pruitt inherited the keys to a pretty reliable SUV that needs some TLC to get going again. So even if he has early success, think about some of these coaches that are relatively young or first-time head coaches. Will Muschamp went to a Sugar Bowl in his second year. He was fired 2 years later, and he only started to get it really right now at South Carolina. I think he evolved into a pretty good head coach. Gus Malzahn went to a national championship in his second year as a head coach, first at Auburn. And I think we'd all agree he really didn't learn how to be a complete head coach until last month, like November of 2017. So, it takes a long time. Even if some of these guys do have early success, these young and sometimes first-time head coaches, they have to deal with a lot of things that first-time head coaches don't really know how to handle, even if it's after a pretty high level of success, like Muschamp going to the Sugar Bowl and Gus Malzahn going to the national championship game.
Let me ask you about Malzahn, because Barrett, when we were in Atlanta a week and a half ago, there was a lot of speculation. If he lost that game, he might be on the first G5 to Fayetteville. He didn't go, and Auburn paid him significant change to remain. I realize short term it looks like a very good decision, but do you think it was a good decision for the long haul?
Well, yeah, because that's kind of what the market dictates now. If you're talking about a guy who can get you consistently in the national championship hunt in a really tough division, Gus Malzahn, is that guy, and really was that guy regardless of what happened against Georgia, the first matchup in the Iron Bowl, because 4 out of the last 5 Novembers, we've talked about him being in the national championship hunt. Now, last year, obviously, injuries took their toll. In 14, they had that upset loss to Texas A&M, I believe, in early November. But they are, they're always in that mix. And in this day and age, the number that he got paid is kind of what a coach with that sort of resume entails. And I never really bought into the Arkansas thing. I certainly knew they were going to ask him, but I thought that if, once Auburn went out there and did what they did at Georgia the first time, he was staying. And they knew that they were going to pay him. It was just a matter of when the deal would actually get done after the Iron Bowl or after the SEC championship game, and specifically how much he would command. And as it turns out, beating the number one team in the country 2 times in 3 weeks entails a lot of money.
Barrett, a lot of coaching changes. I won't go down every one because I know you've talked about them here before. You mentioned Jeremy Pruitt, also Malzahn staying, Jimbo Fisher. Of the other ones, which ones do you like, and are there any that leave your eyes rolling and your head scratching?
Well, I mean, I really like Dan Mullen at Florida. My opinion of Mullen early on was not very high, but he changed my mind quickly at Mississippi State. And to have, him with those weapons and the potential to recruit those kind of athletes at the University of Florida, especially in a division now where he's the only offensive-minded head coach in that division, that is wildly intriguing to me. I do think it's going to take a couple of years because a lot like Kirby Smart at Georgia when he got that job, the talent at Florida, I think, is a little more underdeveloped than people realize, so it might take him a little while. But I think that could pay huge dividends for them down the road. And Matt Luke at Ole Miss, I get it. I understand it. They're in it for the long haul. They are committing to a long rebuild. That's why they let their players walk. They understand this is going to take a long time, and it's going to be tough for Matt Luke in years 2, 3, and 4. Maybe not next year, depending on who actually transfers outside of Shea Patterson. But they better be committed to some really rough seasons. A lot like Baylor did with Matt Rule. That look what they did this year. Matt Rule was awful in year 1, but they committed a long term to him to let him get that thing going in his image. And Ole Miss, I think, is kind of following the same path. Talking to Barrett Sallee,
Barrett, a couple of coaches did not get hired this year. One was Les Miles. His name came up by fans for every job. I don't know if he ever even got a phone call. Some people believe Philip Fulmer may have called him. Is he getting back in, or is he done?
He'll get back in at some point because he's a really good coach. I mean, I think his success speaks for itself, and I think the 3 years under Nick Saban really have helped him understand what organizationally needs to be done from a football perspective. But he's also established his own sort of voice to it and his own style. So I think he'll get in. I think he's far less toxic than people want to make him out to be. He had some issues at Tennessee with the NCAA and whatnot, and but leaving for USC, he took his dream job. How many times are you going to say no to your dream job? It's the same reason Willie Taggart left Oregon for Florida State. Florida State call. What's he going to say? No, because he's not going to get a chance to answer that question ever again. So he's brash, he's funny, he's different. But he's a really good coach, and at some point, he's going to get in that mix. And I'm surprised he didn't get more attention this year from SEC ADs. But SEC ADs and really ADs around the country seem to be really, really risk-averse these days.
Speaking of risk-averse, what about Hugh Freeze? What does his future look like?
Well, he wants to be an OC. I know that for a fact, and I think he could make a really good OC anywhere because calling ball plays is not a problem that he's had. But it doesn't seem like anybody really wants to bite or at least even float his name out there. And that's the thing. That's why I really don't think it's likely for him this year, because you're not really seeing any tangible, evidence of a school having real interest. You're hearing a lot of supposition, or maybe he can go here, or maybe he can go there. But after the Schiano mess at Tennessee, I think a lot of schools realize, hey, it's probably a good idea that to float a name out there through media members to gauge the reaction for coaches who are somewhat toxic, and you're not getting any of that with Hugh Freeze.
What is the problem for Hugh Freeze? Is it the probation, which doesn't seem like it's going to cost him very much, or is it the other stuff?
It's the other stuff, and I think it's lack of really specificity of the other stuff. I think if he just came out there and had an honest moment and got out there and the tears came and he admitted to specifically what all he did.
Exactly.
I think a lot of people would look past it. And look, not to excuse the behavior, but there are a lot of coaches that I wouldn't say do exactly that, but promiscuity happens, and that doesn't excuse the behavior. But it doesn't mean he should be blackballed and not allowed.
No,
to
that's
coach
a great answer, Barry. Because I think you can't have it both ways. You can't talk about how you've straightened your life out without dealing with what brought you down in the first place. One last question. You mentioned Dan Mullen leaving, and to me, I'm really anxious what you have to say. The hiring of Joe Moorhead was just strategic and clean and seamless, and people didn't really or were not that aware of what was going on while it was being done. It was done very quickly, and so far, at least in Starkville, the reception has been very positive. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do, because you had one chance to sort of keep the momentum going. I think Mississippi State recognized what its identity was under Dan Mullen and understood that that's the identity it needed to keep, and you couldn't have handpicked a better option than Joe Moorhead, because when it comes to creative play calling and understanding how to do less with more and how to adjust a system to personnel, he's one of the very best. Dan Mullen's probably a little bit better because he's a little more seasoned, but it's a really good hire. Now, I don't necessarily love his defensive coordinator hire in Bob Shoop, but Moorhead, I think, is a guy who you have the opportunity to build upon your identity from Mississippi State, and you did a pretty good job of that.
Well done. Thank you so much, Barrett. Always a pleasure.
All right, Paul. Thanks for having me.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
And striking the pose is what Baker did and what he has done all year, but it's not over yet. His biggest set of games remains, of course, Georgia in the Rose Bowl and either Clemson or Alabama, assuming they get a win. We welcome you back. Our next guest knows all about being quarterback in a national championship game. And, yes, I think he did win the Heisman in 2009. Actually, one of his teammates won the Heisman, but Greg deserves a lot of credit. Greg, talk a little bit about the march from the Heisman to the national championship game, and what do you think it means to Baker Mayfield, if anything?
Well, Baker Mayfield was just truly exceptional this year. I tweeted as soon as they handed out the award, my ballot, and I had him at number 1 by a pretty wide margin. At number 2, I had Roquan Smith, the Georgia linebacker. I thought he was the best defensive player in the entire country and affected games constantly. And at number 3, I had Lamar Jackson. But Baker Mayfield's incredible, Paul. And if you look at Oklahoma and their roster, top to bottom, 1 to starting 22, probably doesn't match up with that of Alabama, Clemson, and even Georgia to a certain extent. But Baker Mayfield truly makes that roster unique. He is as difficult a player to defend in all of college football with both his arm and with his legs. And the way he makes everyone around him better has been truly sensational. He's been a blast to cover. And I'm a little bummed, though, that his career is coming to an end, because I certainly think he's been a joy to watch over the last few years.
Indeed, it has, and we talked about this a minute ago. And while I think it is early to look ahead, you know the field of players who are returning. But as we reconvene here in a couple of months, who do you believe all of us will be pointing toward in 2018?
In regards to the Heisman Trophy, Paul,
yes.
The forecast for the 2018
we want
Heisman.
to get you on the record right now.
Well, I just read your Twitter a little while ago. It sounds like you're voicing your support for Shea Patterson because you think
yes.
Michigan is all of a sudden, because of the addition of a quarterback, in the national title game hunt. It depends a little bit on whether or not Sam Darnold returns to school. If Sam Darnold returns to school, you got to think he's probably the front runner, the quarterback at USC. He's going to be in the hunt. Jalen Hurts is likely to be in the hunt because he is, of course, doing a tremendous job of the last few years. If they win the national championship this year, then he'll have a lot of support coming his way. And as you know, you got to be in the national championship hunt to a certain extent to be able to have some of the support necessary to win the Heisman. So if I were to handicap it this far in advance, since you are making me do it 12 months before the award will be handed out, I guess those would be the two front runners, depending on what Sam Darnold would do in regards to his eligibility moving forward.
One quick question on Shea Patterson, though. You've done some Michigan games this year. You obviously have done Ole Miss games as well. How do you think Shea Patterson will fit into what Jim Harbaugh runs up there?
Well, it's a fascinating dynamic because Harbaugh's always been that pro-style guy, kind of methodical, uses the fullback. Now with Shea Patterson, he's going to have to evolve a little bit, and you would think that he'd implement some of those spread principles, some of those zone read things that Shea Patterson's so comfortable running, and some of the RPOs that Michigan has used, but maybe not hung their hat on in recent years. So I think it's a fascinating dynamic, and wow, what a get for Jim Harbaugh, because Shea Patterson has been outstanding, albeit he's been a little up and down because of his health. But I do think when he's playing at his best, he's better than anyone they've had in recent years. So with a quarterback mind like Jim Harbaugh and the creativity that he'll apply to the position, it's going to be a tall order for teams to contain that offense now that they have so much experience coming back on that side of the football, and should be so much better in 2018 than they were this past season.
Sonny Dykes knows all about coaching in Texas. He has been around and has been very successful. It appears that he is heading to SMU to complete, we think, the coaching carousel. It's not done yet, but certainly among the leading candidates. Greg, you know the terrain in Texas very, very well. Obviously, you grew up there, played high school football there. These are some of the notable hires of the off season. What do you make out of Sonny possibly ending up out there?
Call me crazy, Paul, and I'd be curious to get your opinion on this. I happen to think SMU is one of those sleeping giant little group of five schools. Now, will they ever ascend past a Texas or an Oklahoma or an Oklahoma State? Absolutely not. But why can't they create something similar to what UCF has created in Florida? You're in a big market, you're in a wonderful school, a lot of resources and money, and a ton of talent in your own backyard. It's one of the biggest, obviously, hotbeds for recruiting in the entire country is the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Now, I know TCU many, many years ago far surpassed SMU, and SMU has had a difficult time getting back to being notable, but I think Chad Morris has the program moving in the right direction, and why can't this be one of those perennial contenders in the group of five? It's a beautiful place. And another thing, too, Paul, I think that if one of these conferences were to realign, they might look at a place like SMU down the road. Now, it might be several years, but if SMU can establish some continuity and sustain some success, then it could be an opportunity for one of those conferences that does want to expand and expand their footprint. Maybe SMU is one of those places they evaluate.
I couldn't help but read the obituary over the weekend. Ron Meyer, who was the coach out there in the early 80s, who brought the Pony Express with Craig James and Eric Dickerson. Let me move on.
Leave it to Paul to just take a completely negative turn.
Well, no, Ron was a great coach. Unfortunately, he left the program, and Bobby Collins inherited it and ended up getting the death penalty, which is why we're still talking about SMU all these many years later. Of the coaching hires, Greg, let me get your take on which ones you like the most as we complete that carousel.
Well, the one that stands out most to me has got to be Chip Kelly to UCLA. And I look at what he's done over the course of his career. He's always had innovative offense, and UCLA is in a place where he can go 10 miles in a radius around the campus and field an elitely competitive football team. And I really think that if he's able to figure out a way to play defense and still use some of the offensive principles he's used over the course of his career, then he's going to shake up the Pac-12 South immediately. He knows the terrain, he knows the landscape, and I happen to think that UCLA is poised for a huge jump, not only next year, but in the years to come. Don't be shocked if they're knocking on the door of USC here in a very, very short period of time, and he has them in the hunt for a Pac-12 championship annually.
Greg, of the significant coaching hires, is there one that maybe you're shaking your head about a little bit?
Yeah, I think I would have to go and keep it in the Pac-12 South ball. I look at Herm Edwards at Arizona State. It's just an unusual dynamic to me. I've never seen a coaching search that's resulted in, hey, by the way, Todd Graham, you're the head coach. You have a $12 million buyout. Here's your buyout. Please leave the program. We're going to keep the rest of your staff, and then we're going to just change head coaches and bring in Herm Edwards. He hasn't been in the field in 30 years at the collegiate level. He only coached DBs in that one stop. He hasn't coached at any level in the last decade, so it's a unique approach. I applaud Ray Anderson for being forward-thinking, the athletic director at Arizona State, but I just have a tough time understanding how this dynamic is going to work. I appreciate the CEO model, but I just don't understand why they wouldn't have looked a little bit more heavily into guys that have had success at the collegiate level at least in recent years.
Of all the coaching hires, the most intriguing, Greg?
That's got to be Jimbo Fisher. The amount of money and the resources that Texas A&M has, and now Jimbo Fisher, one of the best minds in all of college football and a great evaluator of quarterback talent. Now you take him from Florida State, you put him in College Station, and you give him the keys to perhaps maybe the most quarterback plentiful state in the entire country. I'm so excited to see what he does with the resources, and I think immediately from day one, he's the second best coach in the SEC West behind, obviously, Nick Saban, and he could shake things up knowing that there's a lot of talent in his own backyard.
Thank you for listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast. The Paul Finebaum Show airs weekdays on the SEC Network, beginning at 3 Eastern.